So again, let's make it a discussion. So if you've got input, please, with pleasure. Okay. So we're going to start with something that seems very basic, and that's when you first get the kit. Even opening the bags can make a difference to your model.
Yeah, you can't sell it afterwards.
You can't sell it afterwards. Well, you can. You just got to say so. No, but often you get loose parts in the bags, or you get parts in the bags that are half attached to the sprue that are slightly loose. And if you just rip the bag open, you end up tearing those pieces off the sprue as well, and then you damage those pieces. So it sounds really, really basic, but always cut the bags open to take the pieces out. So cut the bag open, and you've got a big wide opening, you can slide everything out. And every piece that you damage, you've got to fix later. Then, removing the parts from the sprue. Okay, the most basic thing. Now, I'm sure a lot of us, when we were 10, we put the sprue down and we take a big knife and we cut. Or you bend it off, yeah. Lekker. I still do that. Obviously, if you bend it, if you twist it off, or you take a knife, you run the risk of then scarring the part as well. So what I do is I've got these angled pliers, and for example, if I'm going to take this piece off here, I'll cut very far away from the part. Okay?
Especially the clear parts.
Especially the clear parts. We're going to get to that now. So you cut very far away, so that the part, when it comes off, has still got quite big pieces of sprue attached. Okay? Then you can take the fine nippers and get much closer to the part than you can get on the sprue, because you can't really get that close in the sprue. So then you can take the fine nippers and clip pretty close, but again, not right up to the edge. You want to leave a little bit of plastic on the part to finish off. So you cut it off relatively neatly, but leave a little bit of plastic behind. Now, that little bit of plastic that's left behind, what I tend to do is, if it's a two-part piece, leave that piece on when you glue it together. So when you glue it together, which I've now taken two of the same part, because I didn't look. So when you glue it together now, I'm just pushing this together now. But when you glue it together, you're going to have these rough pieces that stick out. But that's actually easier to clean up when it's in one glued piece.
And melted.
And you can melt it. Yeah. So I'm going to glue this together quickly, thanks to Selwyn and Mike, who had some glue in their box of tricks, because I forgot mine. So again, a real basic thing. Is dry fitting. You know, it sounds ridiculous, but a lot of people don't, or forget to do it. Always dry fit the parts. Okay, you can pick up a problem and solve it much quicker than if you glue them together and they don't fit. Then you've got glue all over the place. They don't fit properly.
Sometimes you've got ejector towers on the inside.
Yeah.
Sometimes you try to fit it with glue and then you get fingerprints over it.
Fingerprints. Right, so this glue is not ideal, but it'll do. So with the liquid glue, and I think most people use liquid glue these days. I don't think anybody still uses the tube. The big difference, okay. The big difference is that liquid glue melts the two plastics together. So it welds the two plastics together, whereas the old tube glue actually forms a bond between the two parts. So you end up with plastic that glues them together, much the same as the super glue does. Whereas the liquid glue actually melts the two parts together. So when you're using liquid glue, have the two parts fairly close together, okay, but with a small gap in between, because you're going to use capillary action for the liquid glue. You just put it in, squeeze a little bit to get the glue in the joint, and then squeeze closed. Okay. And what you actually want to do is you want to get a little bit of that melted plastic squirting out. So it gives you a rougher joint than you would have had if you just put two pieces together. But you're going to use that because often you can use that melted plastic and you don't need filler. You know?
And then you know you've got a good joint.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Brilliantly, especially if you've got a thick, like if you take the rear of this tail plane here, you've got this huge thick sprue gate here. You can use a photo etch saw blade there, or what I also do is I also use a P cutter, and you score it. You score it before you take it off the sprue. And then it'll break along the score and not along the trailing edge of your flying surface or your door panel or whatever it is. Okay. The trick is to keep as much control over trimming the plastic away from the part as possible. Okay, then clear parts. When you cut clear parts off the sprue, you really want to be as gentle as possible because clear plastic is a different polystyrene than colored plastic. It's a lot more brittle. So you really want to do exactly the same, but be as careful as possible to have to trim the part, because if you cut it roughly too close, you end up with little tiny hairline cracks that go into your clear parts. I was actually going to add as well, but a heated knife blade also cuts nicely through the sprues, especially for the tiny little parts. These are not really that small, but you can take a heated knife blade and get through quite easily, which also works well on clear plastic. A lot of the more modern kits, the manufacturers are paying a lot more attention to the clear parts, to the sprue gates on the clear parts, whereas the older kits it was really not given much thought. Okay, so we've got our piece there glued together, but I'm going to use the other half that I messed up. So we've still got a tiny little bit of sprue on top there, because that tiny little bit of sprue you're going to sand off. Okay. I like the Squadron sanding sticks. You get them in the bigger size and the smaller size, but there's a number of different guys who do this. And some guys use nail file sanding sticks, whatever works for you guys. Okay. Okay, so we've got this little knobby on the outside here. Now, I always try and just work it down more or less with a coarse stick, and then finish it off with a fine or a medium grit. And the whole trick is to you've now sanded it off as opposed to cutting it off, so you don't get any scarring of the part. Okay. Which on a half like this is not really where you would do it all the time, because you're going to glue it together and then do that. But especially on trailing edges or leading edges or bodies, you want as little damage as possible, because if you damage it, you've got to fix it. So don't make work for yourself. Okay. Obviously, when you've dry fitted parts, all the time that you take to make sure those parts are lined properly before you glue them, or whilst you're gluing them, when the glue's setting, you can still align them properly. All the time that you take to do that is time that you're going to save. Because if you get them nicely aligned, when you sand it, you're going to have a nice round finish or a square finish or whatever you want, as opposed to having to sand big chunks off because you didn't take the time to align it. Okay. And often, especially on older kits, the locating pins will pull the piece out of alignment. Don't worry about that. Cut the pin off. You know? I mean, you'll align the two parts better by eye than if the pin is in the wrong place. So all the time you take aligning parts is time you're going to save at the end. Okay.
Very sorry, what I do as well, especially if you've got two halves like that, you cut the pins off, and to get them to make
Flat.
take a piece of sandpaper and do this.
So I do exactly the same with halves. A small piece of glass. Just tape a piece of sandpaper on the two edges to the glass, and then you can work like that. You don't have to do a lot. I mean, basically, always try and work in a figure 8, because then it's difficult to sand one side down too much. And literally, normally you just need to do one figure 8 just to take off any raised areas, and you'll see that the parts also fit a lot better together. Okay. Or not. Okay, then we've done a little bit of gluing here, but I'm just going to quickly touch on the different types of glue. Because different types of glue you use are different things. Okay. Obviously, liquid glue you want to use whenever you're gluing plastic to plastic. It melts the two parts together. You can use that chemical reaction to make sure that joint is tight. Squeeze a little bit of plastic out. All of that saves you time filling later. Okay. Personally, the new Tamiya quick setting liquid glue is fantastic. It is absolutely brilliant. It really dries quickly.
That's an
Ultra thin, yeah.
The lime green bottle.
The lime green bottle, yeah. Not the. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the original Tamiya liquid glue, and certainly if you want a little bit of time to maneuver parts, then you use that. But if you're gluing stuff together that fits nicely, that you want quick, that new Tamiya glue is superb. It really is.
You've got to be quick, it's really quick setting.
It is quick setting, yeah. But really, really nice stuff, and it doesn't evaporate, which people who use, I've used methylene chloride, which also dries very quickly, and you can use it for the same purpose, but it evaporates like hell. You know, a bottle like that will literally evaporate in an evening. So that new Tamiya glue is really, really good, I must say. As I said before, every now and again Tamiya brings something out, you think, bloody hell, why? You know? And then you use it and you think, all right, how did I manage without this? You know? So that's liquid glue. Super glue, obviously if you're gluing resin parts, or I mean we're talking about the basics, but in these days, resin is a basic component. There's a lot of kits come with one or two resin parts in them, or fun edge, which obviously is not basic, but if you're using anything other than plastic to plastic, you're going to need to use a super glue or an epoxy. Epoxy generally is used for bigger joints where you want some time to line them up and you need some strength afterwards. Okay. Typically for resin to resin or white metal to white metal, where you want some strength afterwards. Obviously you've got a drying time associated with that, 10 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it is, but it's got its place. Super glue, you get obviously different types. You get a thick gel type, you get a thinner, and then you get the really thin watery type. Personally, I never use the really thin stuff. If it's that thin that you're going to use it for that, liquid glue is fine. No, it's your glue. Yeah, it's your glue. Thanks, Selwyn. So that's super glue. Now the trick with super glue is never glue a part from the bottom. Okay? Because you will end up with masses of super glue in the wrong place. So I always have business cards that I use, or old business cards, and you drop some out on it and use a cocktail stick to apply, or a piece of brass rod to apply. I know some guys use masking tape turned back on itself because that also works. But one of the sort of basic rules is never put super glue on out of the bottle. Okay, you will end up with too much.
Soft drink bottles, Plastic cap.
Plastic caps.
Beer bottle tops works well.
Beer bottle tops also work.
I don't know about that, the fuck.
No, the wrinkles don't work. Okay, so that's super glue, and then crystal clear, which is a water-based glue, really good for canopies or for clear pots. Okay, doesn't have a lot of strength afterwards. Okay, so you've got liquid glue that melts the two parts together. You've got as much strength as you're going to get out of that. Okay, if you use it properly, that joint is as strong as a plastic part. Okay, super glue is very strong tensile strength, but has very weak shear strength. Okay, so typically, if you're going to be putting on something that's sticking out, like a bomb rack or something like that, super glue is not 100% ideal for that because it doesn't have much shear strength. But if you pin it, if you just put a couple of little pins in and use super glue, then you've got the right thing right. Super glue is like a lot of other chemical products. You get what you pay for. Okay. The base of super glue is cyanide. Cyanoacrylate, that's it. And that's what gives you that rapid drying and strength. And the cheap super glues just don't have enough of it in it. So it is literally, you get what you pay for. Okay. I also use the Rocket super glue, which is also hellishly expensive, but it's brilliant. I mean, if you hold that part in place, you literally hold it for 3-4 seconds and it's glued, which doesn't always happen.
There's one from America as well, a lot of the radio control guys use it, it's called Zap.
Yes. And of course you can use Superglue Accelerator. Personally, I don't generally use it because you're normally using superglue onto a painted surface. So if you use Accelerator, it affects the paint. The Superglue Accelerator was designed for guys building balsa wood models, for radio control or for gliders, to make it quick. So I know some guys use Accelerator for plastic. It is what it is. I hardly ever use it. That's glues. Each have their place. Okay, so we've done some sanding of a seam, but then we all know the dreaded mold lines. Okay. Just about every part coming off the sprue will have a mold line somewhere. I'll try and find one now. And what I do with mold lines.
He doesn't have it.
Doesn't have any parts. So what I do with a mold line is I actually use a Sharpie. And each part's got a mold line, and what you do is you just make a mark over the mold line. Okay? Because then, when you sand it down, now you can see there I've sanded, but I've still got some black. But it's a tiny amount, which would show up as when you put the paint on, would show up on the mold line. And as soon as you've sanded, all the marker away, you know you've got no mold line left. Okay, so for those of us that are getting a bit older and going half blind, it's actually quite useful. Okay. The other thing with round parts is I always use what they call flexi files. I know there's a few different types. They're actually not that expensive to buy, and they are a really good investment because when you're sanding a round edge, you're not sanding it flat, which you run the risk of flattening the round part. It works on pressure, and you just use these. Okay.
Did you get those?
You can get them from most of the American shops sell them. I don't know, Essex had some at one stage.
You get them from Dream Trains as well.
From where?
Dream Trains
Dream Trains.
in Bloemfontein.
Yeah, in Bloemfontein. They're not expensive. I mean, the sets of, I bought 4 handles, or no, I actually bought these off Donald a long time ago. Right in front of me. But I've actually just bought new sanding strips. They were like $3 for 10. And they last a long time. The beauty of these as well is that it comes off the edge. So you can, like for example on the Eagle, if you're sanding this piece on the inside, you can put this on the inside and work on the inside as well. Okay, very, very useful tools. I would say pretty much essential. Saves a lot of time as well. And you can use them on everything. You can use them on metal, you can use them on resin, you can use them on plastic. Doesn't matter. Okay. I've got a few different handles with different grits on, so you don't have to keep changing the thing all the time. Okay. Then the one thing that a lot of people forget about is often you won't see a mold line on a pot. Like for example, for example, on this is the blow doors on the thing. So you won't see a mold line running through it, but the mold line is on the edge of the pot. Okay? A lot of undercarriage doors as well have it on the edge of the pot. And it's important to remember to take that off as well, just with a blade. Just work off the edge so that edge is not sticking out. That makes a big difference, especially on undercarriage doors, window frames on cars. You often put the mold line on the inside of the window frame, which you don't see immediately, but if you don't take it off, it gives you fit problems later, and also it doesn't look right. Basically, if you take every piece of a kit and work it over, because there's going to be mold lines somewhere on that pot. There has to be for the process. But a lot of the times they run on the edge of the pot and you don't see it, but you've got to take it off as well. Okay? Then, of course, you have the dreaded ejector pin locks. Okay. Now, unfortunately, the fact of injection molding, you can't get away without it. It's part of the process. A lot of the more modern kits have taken a lot more care as to where those ejector pin marks are, and a lot of parts, especially the Japanese, you'll see the part has little bobbles attached to random places where they're using those as the ejector pins, which you've still got to take off, but you don't have to clean up the ejector pins. If an ejector pin mark is raised, which happens, then it's fine. You can sand it flat. But if it's sunken, you have to fill it. Often you end up with an ejector pin mark in a wheel bay or some obscure, almost impossible to get at place. Okay. To fill them, you can use. A lot of people, and I've used it quite successfully. You can use Tipp-Ex, white Tipp-Ex. Just paint it in, and it settles down, and you can just literally, so long as you can get 1 or 2 passes with some sandpaper on that area, it levels it out. Okay. It doesn't really work, if this wing section had ejector pin marks underneath, which is not unheard of with older kits, it doesn't really work there, and you need to fill those. Okay, because as soon as you put any pressure on it, it sinks. Personally, my favorite is light gearing putty. Also, not cheap, in fact, hellishly expensive, but you use so little of it. And the beauty of this is that you can cure it with a UV torch. Okay, obviously sunlight cures it like that. Okay, but you can sand it down to literally a feather edge, which a lot of the putties you can't. So for ejector pin marks, it's ideal, especially when you get an uneven one where one edge is almost non-existent and the other edge is a little bit deeper. You can really use it nicely.
Sorry, Gary, what color is that button?
It's yellow.
Yellow.
It's like a yellow color. Okay. Going to say something. Yeah. But the beauty of it is it dries to the same hardness as plastic. So when you're sanding it, it sands at the same rate as plastic. So it's not, it's effectively the same as putting a piece of plastic in, which is quite important, especially for ejector pin locks, because you can end up with a bump if you use superglue, for example, to fill an ejector pin lock. Superglue is harder than plastic, and then you can end up with a bump. Even with a flat sanding edge, you can end up with a bump where the superglue is. Okay. Also, when you sand wet, it's something that a lot of people don't know. If you understand a little bit about the science of sandpaper, when you sand wet, the water removes the whatever it is you're sanding, the plastic or the resin or whatever white metal, from between the grit, so the grit does its job better. So it's always advisable, if you can, to sand wet. It makes the sanding easier, if you can put it that way. Okay. And certainly when I'm, it's not really for today's discussion, but when I'm polishing a car body, you always use a sandpaper mix, because it removes the sanding residue from the previous residue. Okay. So when you're building the basics, and we've talked about the basics, from the point of view of cutting pieces off and gluing pieces together and whatever, but when you're putting something together, it sounds simple, but I've seen really, really nice models that have come absolutely nowhere in a competition, if that's what you're aiming for, because things are not symmetrical. Okay, you end up with one wing that's slightly out or a tailplane that's slightly out. So all the time you spend making sure things are square or symmetrical pays off in the end. Okay. And it sounds really basic, but that's what it's all about. But I'm talking. If it's sitting on its wheels, the wings generally should be level and that sort of stuff. If it's a car model, if it's sitting on its wheels, the front bumper should be level. It shouldn't be, at some funny angle. Those type of basics. The same quite often happens in car models, actually, because quite often you'll end up with a door or a side insert that you glue in that gives you the door and maybe the sill. And obviously the door panel line you want to keep. So what I do is say this was the one half of the fuselage, half. Okay. Take a sharp knife edge and just bevel that edge slightly. Do the same on the other side. Then when you glue the two together, you've actually got that slight beveled edge that you wouldn't normally do to start with. Yeah. That's what I do for
Any solution I can think of?
that's the only solution I know of as well, is to slightly bevel the edge, and when you glue the two together, you've got that start, and then you go your scribing tool. Yeah, the Germans didn't think of model makers when they did that. And that's quite important, because if you want to keep the panel line, it's actually a lot more difficult to keep the panel line than it is to fill it and sand it. One of the cars I'm busy with at the moment is a Porsche, a 918 Porsche, and it's got this really fancy intake that sits behind the door, and this whole plastic part you've got to glue in, fill part of it and keep the panel line on the other part of it, which is a lot trickier than it sounds. No. Right. So that's the basics. Is there anything else that anybody wants to ask about for basics? I'm obviously not covering painting or anything like that today. It's just basic assembly. Scribing. Okay, scribing. Once you've got the two parts together and you've done your sanding, you've got everything nice and level, on an aircraft, you're always going to end up having to rescribe some of the panel lines. Okay. I've had this TriMaster scribing tool for years. Keep your little oil stone that you keep the point sharp with, and you, with very little pressure, can scribe the panel. Okay. There's other ways of doing it as well. I've also started using the photo etch saws for the panel lines, which work really well because they're nice and thin. A knife blade upside down and backwards could also work. The thing with panel lines is it's really about experimenting what works for you, what's easiest for you. And I don't think there's one set, hard and fast rule as to what to do. Even between different makes of kits, because sometimes the plastic is, it's softer. On car bodies, for example, the Fujimi cars, the plastic they use tends to be very soft. And if you go in with something like this, you can do quite a lot of damage. So you end up using almost a blunt blade backwards for them. Whereas the Tamiya plastic tends to be a lot, I don't want to say better quality, but it's a lot harder. And then you can use a photo etch saw or a scribing tool.
On raised panel lines, some aircraft you actually got a raised panel line. Obviously, when sanding them down, you actually destroy that panel, that raised edge. Any best way to restore that?
So the one a couple of meetings ago, Malcolm had a 48 scale A26 Invader that he'd built, which comes with raised panel lines. And all he'd done is on the spine, where the raised panel lines obviously got sanded off, he'd engraved it very lightly and just run that in. On the rest of the airframe, he painted it first, and then very lightly just sanded over the panel lines and brought the panel lines out, which I thought was really clever. So the combination of the two really worked. In fact, when I looked at it the first time, I said to him, "Oh, you've rescribed the whole kit." And he literally painted, left the raised panel lines, and when it was painted, it sanded over them lightly, so the colour of the plastic actually showed through, but you couldn't see it with plastic because obviously it's so thin. Which, certainly on the darker coloured plastic kits, we all...
You have the right colour plastic.
Sorry?
You have the right colour plastic.
You have the right colour plastic, sure. All right, guys, thanks for your attention. Hopefully you learned just one thing. Great, thanks.